You're listening to the Visible Expert Podcast, where we share stories, research, and actionable insights to help B2B marketers and practitioners drive extraordinary growth in their professional lives. Thank you for tuning in to the Visible Expert Podcast. I'm John Tyerman.
And I'm Kelly Waffle.
And today we interviewed the CEO of Wrike, Andrew Filev. Kelly, what did you think of our talk with Andrew?
I just think it's fascinating. The guy has done so much. He's, on the bunch of lists for 40 under 40, and to come over from Russia over here, he had actually started a company, I think, over there, and then come over here and kind of be part of creating a category is pretty neat, which is what they've done with Wrike, and just to watch the growth of that. His leadership, touches not only the way that their product is developed, but the culture of the company and a bunch of other areas. What did you think so far?
Well, I really liked how Andrew talked to us about vision casting and how you have an idea of something in your head, but communicating that effectively to your team, it can be a challenge. And I think he's a young guy who was an entrepreneur and learned a lot along the way. He calls himself a growth junkie and addicted to learning. And so I thought it was really cool how he shared these experiences and learned by doing this. And I just thought it was a great interview.
It really was. So, like you say, he calls himself a productivity freak and a growth junkie, and when he's hiring and managing people, he's really looking for people who are not only smart, but really have that intellectual curiosity. And, he really believes that their organization is made up of people, that are paid to succeed. So these people have got to be motivated. They've got to bring a lot of energy and positivity to the table. And that's, I think, really the key to the growth of Wrike so far.
I agree, and for those listening to this podcast, you'll love his culture code that he has over there at Wrike. I thought that was really cool. This episode is sponsored, as always, by the Hinge Research Institute. If you are involved with marketing demand or lead generation and want to use a data-driven approach to content strategy, consider using original research. The Hinge Research Institute offers a range of services from tiered sponsorships of original studies to custom research on specific industry challenges. And we found that high-growth professional services firms are 3 times more likely than no-growth firms to use original research in their content strategy. And, according to Forbes, companies who adopt a data-driven approach to marketing are 6 times more likely to be profitable year over year. So if you're interested in learning more, email us at research@hingemarketing.com. and we'll find the right approach to using original research for you. All right, let's dive right into our chat with Andrew.
Our guest today is Andrew Filev, founder and CEO of Wrike, a collaborative work management platform. Under his leadership, the company has been consistently recognized for its excellent product, tremendous growth, and top-rated work environment. Wrike has been included on Deloitte's Technology Fast 500 list, named a leader in the Forrester Wave on collaborative work management enterprise tools, and selected as a top workplace by the Bay Area News Group for the 5th straight year in 2019. And a few months ago, Andrew was named to Silicon Valley's Business Journal's esteemed 40 under 40 list of rising stars. Andrew, welcome to the show, and how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you for having me here.
Hey, Andrew, here at Hinge, we define recognized CEOs and influencers who freely share their expertise in the B2B and professional services space as visible experts. And this podcast is focused on sharing the stories of our guests and really illuminating the challenges and rewards they encountered as they build their personal brands and expertise. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a visible expert?
My personal journey is tied at the hip with their company I founded about a decade ago. So started Wrike in 2006. We created the whole category, software category that's now called collaborative work management, and saw their explosion of that category. So today we have about 20,000 customers around more than 100 countries. We have more than 2 million users. We continue to grow fast. I bootstrapped the company for many years, and then I raised a lot of capital. And then I seen a significant majority investment from the best and largest enterprise software investor in the world, Vista Equity. So I've seen a lot, and we continue to grow. And I learned a lot and shared some of those learnings with the world, and that sort of ties back into the personal brand.
That's great. For those who do not know what Wrike does, that has those 20,000 customers engaged, and you had mentioned 2 million users. Can you spend a few minutes talking about Wrike?
Absolutely. My pleasure. So what we do is we call it work management. The roots are in what was called project management and task management, but it is much broader. So if you think about it, any company today, especially departments like marketing, operations, software, their work is mostly digital and exists in some sort of ether today with thousands of emails and text messages and spreadsheets flying around. And that is not very scalable. So if you want to operate the high-performance team, high-performance business, you want to get visibility into what's going on. You want to get a little bit of predictability. Sometimes if you reach a certain scale, you want to automate some of the routine work. You want to be able to find the data quickly. So all of that kind of blends together in this new concept of digital workspace and work management. And we're one of the pioneers in the space and been growing rapidly with the category.
Hey, Andrew, I've read that as you were growing up in Russia, you got to pick your own magnet school and traveled 2 hours a day commuting on public transportation. You said that experience had a big influence on your management style. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
I think there are two big parts to it. So one is my continuous drive to learn, and I carried it through the years. So when I first started at that school, my first grade was actually F. And then I very quickly became like one of the best students in sort of multiple disciplines. So it was always been, I always had this big passion of learning. And then the other thing, which ties back to the work I do, is I became a productivity freak from the early days. Because when you have all that academic pressure and you also have to invest 2 hours of your day into commute, you start to value every minute. So that, for example, today when I commute, I always listen to audiobooks. And then generally, I have my own productivity methodology, if you will, that I built since those early days when I try to do more in less time.
So you said you listen to audiobooks. What's the audiobook you're listening to now?
I'm right now. It's their sci-fi 3-Body Problem. Right before that, on the plane from Europe, I finished their Everything story about Bezos and Bad Blood about kind of their not so pleasant side of the Silicon Valley.
Andrew, you've had the chance to start several companies. What are some of the lessons or key takeaways you've learned about hiring and managing people?
My hiring methodology at the root is very simple. I'm looking for people who are smart, and I don't necessarily mean academic smart. It's not about GPA. It's just about ability to think on the feet and kind of process information and having that same curiosity and the drive to learn as I have, that intellectual curiosity. Second, I'm looking for people who can get stuff done. I like to say that no matter what you're doing, there are always 10 reasons to fail, but we get paid to succeed, right? That's our job, and that's how we become best in our fields, is kind of overcoming obstacles and figuring out their solutions. And third, I'm looking for motivation. I think it's extremely important we spend at least 8 hours a day at work, and so I believe in purposeful work where we love what we're doing, and because of that, we just have more energy, positivity that translates into, I believe, better work results and healthier work environment. And we kind of see both, right? If you've mentioned the fact that we've been named best place to work for the last 4 years, and also one of the fastest growing companies in the last 4 years continuously. And I believe both have to do with that passion towards what we do, so we can commit and excel at our everyday jobs.
So, Andrew, I've got sort of a two-part question here. What advice would you share with other founders and executives on, number one, how to effectively motivate your employees, and then number two, how to avoid burnout?
So motivation is an art and a science, right? I think there are multiple styles and multiple approaches. Mine is very down to earth. I try to be authentic. I try to channel my own passion. I definitely invest in explaining why something is important, which sounds trivial, but not always is. Like, you might have this, what's called curse of knowledge. You have this perfect picture in your head, and a lot of people assume that everybody around them has the same picture, where in reality, it's not always the case, right? So I try to, when possible, I try to over-communicate. It comes back from the early days of building the company, where we were had distributed teams since the beginning, and I couldn't babysit and micromanage everybody, so it was important to hire the right people and also give them the right direction. And so I always over-invested in kind of upfront in agreeing what we want to do, why we want to do it. So I think those are kind of some of my that's part of my approach. And then doing meaningful work is important part of the burnout, because if you think about it, you have some of the most gratifying and satisfying experiences of our lives are not necessarily easy, right? But it's about that we believe we've done something great and done it with a great team. So I feel part of that is making sure that we're doing the right things for the right reasons. And second part is having the right team around you. So I think a lot of people kind of underestimate the importance of that. That allows you to do more and sustain harder pressure, because you know you're doing it for good reason, be it your own economical reasons or your family or the world or the customer, but you have to have those reasons that will carry you through tougher moments. And then more tactically, I think my personal approach to burnout evolved over the years. So when I was a little bit younger, my biggest issue was that kind of my brain was like a bloodhound. If I had a problem, I wouldn't let it go until I figure out the solution. And sometimes, it just takes a lot of energy if you're in this like 24/7 cycle. So it's not even about being at work, and it's not even about being connected. It's just that your brain is so much focused on those issues that you're never letting go. And so for me, finally, I kind of fought fire with the fire. I once in a while, like maybe in 6 months, I would have a weekend where I would binge on video games or like TV show and go into this like 24 cycle, after which I'm completely sort of emotionally flushed out, and then I would sleep and then go through this reboot, right? And the reason why it worked for me, and I do not recommend it by any means to anybody, but the reason it worked for me is that it allowed me to disconnect and learn to disconnect a little bit from that like constant 24/7 focus on solving something, as opposed to as I sort of gained some experience and wisdom, and my family grew, and I was also able to kind of learn to disconnect. The bigger thing became kind of a work-life balance, and so ability to spend enough time and energy with work, and at the same time enough time and energy with my family. And I feel that people oftentimes underestimate that word energy. It's not always about time. It's not just about the hours. It's about that being present. So one lesson I learned very early is to kind of segregate work and family I would make the early mistakes of trying to work while, for example, spending time with my kids. And it was frustrating experience on both fronts. Like I couldn't get the work done and I wasn't fully present for my family. So while I still work quite a lot, I do prefer to separate. Like if it's a family dinner, I will not pull my phone. Like that's a no-go for me, right? Mm-hmm. It's got to be an emergency for me to do that. If I'm spending time with my kids, and I'll try to not think about like a work problem. If I'm going to my son's game, I try to be present there, and vice versa. If I'm at work, focusing on solving hard problems, I'll try to be fully present there, not get distracted. So I think that's part of my formula that works for me today. And again, it might evolve as my circumstances change and as I continue to grow up.
Andrew, as a visible expert, what channels do you prefer to showcase your thought leadership? And following up on that, what recommendations would you have for other executives trying to raise their visibility with prospects, customers, and different targeted audiences?
So I fundamentally believe that if you're, for example, if you're an entrepreneur, and especially if you gain some traction and success, usually you're very passionate about what you do. And you're, again, spending more than 8 hours a day thinking about it. So there's a lot of knowledge that you build and accumulate in that, and that knowledge is worth sharing if you have time and desire, right? Not everybody does, but if you have time and desire, ultimately you have that knowledge and you have an interesting voice. You're not necessarily right, but you have an interesting voice that's worth considering. And so the advice would be to just be authentic and to try to communicate those valuable lessons. And to not be shy about it, but also to not be too salesy, right? It's not a sales pitch. It's more of a sharing of experience and your viewpoint on your industry or the life or business. And then in terms of their channels, I contribute to Forbes here and there. I speak at various conferences like SaaStr and Web Summit, trying to share what I learned, and sometimes do like interviews like this one. My favorite one was New York Times Corner Office. That was kind of one of the best pieces that I didn't create it, right, but I participated and I really loved what came out of it.
That's great.
Hey, Andrew, can you share a couple of the do's and don'ts when it comes to bootstrapping a company?
Oh boy, the easiest one is the most important is don't run out of money. It's a simple advice. I wish it was as simple. My first company that I started before Wrike was on the brink of failure once. Well, maybe more than once, but like one experience was very vivid when we just moved into our first sort of real office. We've been renting apartments before that, and so we kind of moving into this office. And it was the most beautiful office in the world for me, as you can imagine. Of course, like these days, it would be you would treat it as Class C building and would not get excited about it at all. But for me, it was like the best thing ever. And I was so proud of us kind of getting that physical space. And all the way until very shortly, maybe in a week or two, I got a sense that our biggest and only customer was not going to pay the bill for our services. So that was a very harsh realization, and that delayed me getting any salary from the company for quite a while. And obviously we had to wind down that office, but I did learn valuable lessons on kind of right sizing and right pacing their investment and kind of managing risks, and also not going for kind of external things, because again, for entrepreneur, it's very easy to get caught into like branding and office and all those kind of signs of success. But I think it's what most important is kind of focusing on fundamentals of the business. And so for me now, going into my Wrike experience, the fundamentals of their software business come to product market fit and to understanding your customers. So when I started Wrike, I was more mature, kind of learned a couple of lessons there the hard way. And so in starting the company, I spent a lot of time with customers, including being on the front line of our customer support, where I could feel very vividly customers' pain, and I'm a very empathetic person, so it always kind of gave me the best motivation to go back and change and fix the product. So I think it's very important to keep that connection with the customer in early days and trying to figure out what's best for them while balancing it is with their kind of resources that you have and the ruthless prioritization of what makes more sense. So that I think is advice that's applicable to any bootstrapping company. I like to tell to my employees that our customers are our best investors. And again, that I think is important. I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley that spend disproportionate amount of time and energy onto pleasing to be investors, only to find out that those to be investors are not writing them the check or a little bit later. So while investor relationships are really important, and again, in early days of the business, fundraising is sometimes critical, I do think that ultimately customers are the most important part of the equation. If you have great product that delivers great value, you will sooner or later find investors. The other is not, this equation does not work the other way. If you have great investors, it does not yet mean that you have a great product and that you deliver the real value. So that was the big lesson that I learned, and luckily we carried it over a past bootstrapping phase. Kind of as we get venture funding, we still kept a lot of that original bootstrapping DNA as part of the company.
Andrew, you mentioned empathy as being a critical piece and something that you mentioned being the very empathetic person. I imagine that that's something that you want to instill in your staff. What are some of the keys to instilling that sense of empathy into your team?
It's a good question. And just to be clear, right? I'm an introvert by my background, so that empathy is not necessarily always very visible. And also, as you grow the business, right? You're running the company, you get a lot of kind of blows on the way. So as a CEO, you sometimes need to grow a little bit thicker skin. Because, for example, I get very attached to people, but as the company grows and as those people grow, sometimes they kind of leave the nest and have to find their own next chapter and continue to do great things. And that was always kind of very hard experience for me, as was the other part of it. I know that one of the hardest thing that you have to do as an entrepreneur and as a new manager is letting somebody go, right? And that's where kind of being empathetic on one hand is great, because you're you treating people as people, but on the other hand, it makes it very hard on you, because all those it's kind of harder to go through those things. But going back to your question, we have our own culture code, and part of our culture code is we try to codify it as kind of as simple as possible. So we didn't want like 12 things, and we didn't want like long paragraphs. So one of our values, we simply call it collaboration. Right. And so we know that if we succeed together. And if we fail together. That means both within the company and kind of with our customers as well. And so we hire to that. We test it in their interviews. We pay especially big attention to that if you're in a customer facing function. But even if you're not, we, pardon my language, try to not hire jerks. Right. We want you to be good citizen for our own sake, because again, we spend 8 hours at work every workday, and so we want to make it good experience for you and for ourselves. So I don't think you can change people a lot. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just don't know the secret formula. So I don't think you can change a lot in this dimension. You just have to be cautious when you hire. If possible, we always do reference checks. And that kind of also helps us to understand a little bit about the personalities. For example, if we're hiring a leader, we would try to do not only the reference checks from the top, but also reference checks from people who reported to that person. Like, hey, could you tell me how good of a leader that person was? Or even in an interview process, we might ask a leader, give us an example of how you hired and developed somebody to become a superstar, right? It's not just all about you and performance. It's like, how do you lead the team? How do you help them grow?
Earlier, Andrew, you talked about intellectual curiosity as being a criteria for recruiting somebody. Can you tell us what's the latest thing that you've learned on the job?
As you can imagine, after doing this for more than a decade, it's less about small technical things, right? It sort of is most of my latest learnings. They're focused more around scaling the business and continuing to kind of maintain the excellence and culture and velocity as we go through that. So one of the areas where I try to get as much exposure and learn from peers, learn from great leaders who've done it before me, is as we grow as a company, org design becomes an interesting question. When you're a small business, like one product, usually you try to not reinvent the wheel. It's pretty straightforward. You got your sales, you got your marketing, you got your product, you got your engineering, you got customer support, customer success. But as you grow the business, you start targeting multiple audiences, coming up with multiple products, going after multiple geographies. It becomes kind of a matrix structure, if you will, at least conceptually. But the org chart is usually less efficient in a matrix way. People work, kind of take direction in most efficiently and most transparently, kind of when they have a manager who guides them and is responsible for that goal setting and transparency and coaching. So as our business grows, one of their interesting puzzles is like, how do we achieve fast growth rates in all those new areas, while at the same time managing organization efficiently and not providing like too many overlays and not losing the ball in translation between the teams. I know it sounds for the person who is an engineer by training, it doesn't sound very math-like or engineering-like. It's more of a like complex system dimension, but there are some interesting learnings based on my own trials and tribulations, and also try to see what other companies and other CEOs are doing and have done.
So Andrew, you touched on this a little bit earlier when you talked about your culture, and Wrike has been known as a best place to work. What do you think makes the work environment at Wrike so special?
I think part of it is diversity of thought. We come from very different backgrounds, and I wouldn't focus on any specific area of diversity. It's age, it's gender, it's orientation, it's location. So it's nationality. Like since the beginning, we were a multinational company since fairly early days, and so like today we have our headquarters is in San Jose, Silicon Valley, but we have office in San Diego, we have office in Dublin, Ireland, we have office in Melbourne, we have office in Tokyo, we have office in Prague, and we have more offices around the world as well. And so like it's a little bit of a cultural melting pot and a very high energy one, where a lot of us share and live by those our three values, which one of them I mentioned is collaboration. The other one is growth. So we're what I sometimes call growth junkies. We love learning. We love growing professionally. We love growing the business. We love building the product. And that creates a very kind of exciting and excited culture. And then we're also trying to support each other on the way, as I mentioned. So we're very intense when it comes to work goals, kind of setting high standards of performance and being accountable for them. But at the same time, we try to be very friendly to each other and kind of support each other's on the journey. And then the other part of that is that customer focus that I talked about. It serves as a compass and a North Star. If we all know why we're here, it makes, again, the job more meaningful. And I think that supports healthy culture. And then we always try to be better and become better. So, for example, right now, as we speak, we're running our regular employee engagement survey, which is pretty in depth, and we always invest a lot of time and attention post-survey to trying to understand what's going on, what's working well in the company, what's not, including big focus on kind of the culture, and then try to find some actionable trends and insights that then leaders of specific offices and functions can action on to make it even better work environment. So it's a little bit of that continuous learning approach, not just personally, but as a whole organization as well.
Wow, Andrew, that's that sounds like a great place to work.
Thank you.
So, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to come on our show. For listeners who want to learn more about you and more about Wrike, where would you have them go?
To learn more about Wrike, just go to our website, wrike.com, WRIKE.com. And then for my own musings, you can start with their Forbes column. Just Google my name in Forbes, and you'll hear some things. And definitely, I'm not egocentric, so I think you can learn a lot from all the other leaders, including the great podcast episodes on this very podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, it's very enjoyable. It was great meeting you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you for being great hosts. I appreciate it.